The topic of our discussion today is Education 4.0. How do we teach that the graduates are ready for the modern world? My name is Zolitrin. I'm the Civil Union Osvitoria. I'm the co-founder of Novopečerska School. We've been working for 8 years and more. What we do is we advocate the education topic in wider circles in society. And it's critically important to advocate the point that education is not just a spending article in the budget. It's the most profitable investment of families into their kids, of businesses into their future workforce, investment of the state in its citizens. And we've heard about that from Jack Ma, former school teacher, in the morning. And he didn't say it today, but he finished his business career and he goes back to teaching. And he works a lot with students, school kids, and that's great. This is another proof that education is the most profitable investment. So we're going to be talking today about education in a wonderful company, Ilja Laurs, a Lithuanian serial entrepreneur, venture capitalist. He's in the top 25 leading high-tech experts in Europe. So give a round of applause. Also, we have one of the educational superpowers, Armand Doucet, Canada. He's a school teacher, and he is in the best teachers of the world rating by Global Teacher Prize. Armand is a wonderful expert in digitalization and innovation in education. He also is a TED speaker and author of books Teach Life and Teach in Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's a follow-up of a book by Schwab, what the education should be like. So, give a round of applause to Armand. Ari Pohka from Finland. We've all heard about the miracles of education in Finland. Ari is head of one of the biggest schools in Finland. He's an author of a book, Managing the Finnish Style, and he's a head of the World Association of School Directors, and he's going to be talking to us about Finnish life hacks. And you know, in education, in different forums, different panels, we see different stakeholders. It's policymakers in education, teachers, professors, and if we're lucky, we also sometimes see businesses. But we're very little is that we talk with the main stakeholders, students and school kids. So Olga Kazakau is in our panel. I know her the most about her from this panel. She's a young Ukrainian scientist from Mariupol, from the war zone, close to the war zone. When she was 14, in her birthday, she got an agreement from parents that they allow for her to go work. And next day, she was working in the cancer hospital. She's still working there. She designed a method of the diagnostics of melanoma, it's skin cancer, which now Aragon Laboratory together with Olja is implementing in medical science and application. So with this method that she designed, it's going to be easier and quicker to diagnose cancer. Give a round of applause. So I presented to you our speakers. I know we also, Anna Navasad promised to be here, but she's in Dnipro now. She's dealing with the higher education. But I don't think it's going to be a lot about policy making today in terms of questions. Let me also tell you that in the chatbot of KIEF Economic Forum, you can ask questions to us. I will monitor these questions, and I will ask these the best questions to our speakers. So I'm going to be monitoring the questions for you. In order to begin, we have prepared a little video about educational statistics in Ukraine. I'll ask the organizers to launch it and then we'll start the discussion. Is education capable of changing the country? Singapore, limited natural resources, economically strong neighbors, and education is the most highest priority investment. Estonia is a post-Soviet country with weak economy, but now is one of the most high-tech countries in the world. What's the place of Ukraine in the world? 47th Global Innovation Index, 120th in economic sustainability. It's the poorest country in the world. And it's the least happy country in the world by UN version. Where in this situation the education should move? 17,000 schools, 437,000 teachers, 6% GDP for education, 82% of Ukrainians have higher education, 47% of the unemployed also have higher education. The average teacher salary is 8,000 hryvnia, which is about $300. New Ukrainian school is project-oriented teaching, decentralization. So education is indeed the best investment that a country, a state can make in its own citizens.
So just a few brief statistics for you, because there were no translation. We have 17,000 schools. We have almost 450 teachers, and we invest 6% of GDP in our education, from preschool till they graduate. That's one of the highest rates in Europe. We also have the highest rate of highly educated people, but we have highest rate of people with higher education who are unemployed. And that's what we are going to discuss. And my first question will be to Armand, if you don't mind. So you're a representative of Canada, educational super country. And you wrote books on the topic of modern education, what it should be to prepare people for tomorrow. Can you try to tell us main idea of modern system of education and maybe 2, 3 characters, features of it?
It's a great question. I've got one for you just quickly before I start. Did they say that Ukraine was the unhappiest country in the world? Is that what they said? Okay.
That's according to UN, yes.
Okay. I had the food last night. I'd be really happy if I'm living in Ukraine. I thought it was quite good, actually. So the question in terms of modern education is quite complex. One, it's based off your strengths and weaknesses as a country. So I think first and foremost, you have to understand what your governance styles are, what type of social systems you have, what are strengths and weaknesses of the culture, religion, so on and so forth, before you can actually address the education system. That's first and foremost, because not understanding that, you're going down the wrong path. If you're trying to copy-paste a model, it's not like McDonald's. It's not going to work. Because at the end of the day, it's about the humans that are in that classroom. And they are humans, and they come with a certain perception, a certain paradigm. So you have to make sure that you reach them where they're at. So if you're looking at a modern education system, and what does that mean going forward? First and foremost, you have to have a professional teaching workforce. So Jack Ma talked about it today, invest in your employees. Well, in terms of Ukraine, you're going to invest in your future by investing in teachers, because they are the ones that are on the front line investing in students. So if you don't have a professional workforce, you're going to struggle. And in systems around the world that I've seen through my books, the ones that are really struggling at the moment is where teaching is an occupation, where it's check off, check the check boxes and make sure that the list is done, but there's no humanity in it, no personalization in it, and it's not connected.
Can I interrupt you with one more question? One of the statistics on a screen was that Ukrainian teachers receive around $300 monthly. What should be first? I'll rephrase it. Do you believe that we still should invest in teachers' capacity if they have such a low salary? And would it really motivate them, this professional development? Or we have to focus all the finances on good salaries?
That's a good question. It's above my pay grade. I'll be honest with you. I'm not going to go, because I don't understand the dynamics of economics in Ukraine. I don't understand the dynamics of what a middle-class salary would be. But realistically, if you want to have a modern education system, teachers need to be treated as professionals and paid as such. We're starting to see it in Canada and in other countries in the world where you're starting to get a divide between professionals, where you have some professions that are now rock star status. Where
rock star status, I like it.
Well, yes, but in some ways it's also making a larger divide. Not to hit on healthcare, but healthcare is extremely important. But if we do our jobs properly in education, healthcare becomes less of an issue. So if we're talking about long-term health, long-term mental health, and it starts with investing in proper education systems so that we can prevent it, then we're looking at a different type of situation in terms of what we need long-term in healthcare. So I think it's one of those cyclical issues that you need to address all of them together, not in silos. And oftentimes we're looking at Band-Aid solutions in education instead of addressing the root causes of things. So if I go back to what a modern education system is, one is professionalization of teaching is absolutely important. The status of teachers is important. Teachers are trying to do their best, but as we keep getting dumped more and more things at our doorstep, like Jack Ma says all the time, education is the most important. Well, the problem is that as you jump more and more on education, there's more and more demands on teachers. So without necessarily the training to be able to adapt to that. So what happens with a holistic education, if you're looking at modern education, you're looking at a holistic education. So competencies, skills, curriculum content, there's still a foundational knowledge that you need. Last thing I want to do is go into a hospital and have my doctor need to Google what he needs to do for me. I want him to have a foundational knowledge to be able to make that answer pretty quickly.
Okay,
So,
can I summarize it for people here, what
Yeah,
you just
go ahead.
said? Отже, якщо вірити Арману, освіта – це
So to summarize, there's no copy-pasting from one educational system to another. It's unreasonable. And we need some basic foundation of knowledge, but we also we have to have active skills and flexible skills, critical thinking, creative thinking, and it's about professional training for teachers who must also be paid in a dignified manner. And also content, there should be relevant content. Not some old school legacy content, but modern.
I heard the translation problem.
Okay, then we'll move to Ari, representative of Finland. And as I mentioned before, in Ukraine, we know a lot about Finland way in education. And I have to say that way of Finland is very similar to Ukraine at the moment, I believe. When Finland started their educational transformations, they were between Sweden and Russia. They were trying to find back their national identity, and educational reform was one of key factors that made them successful on this path. Ari, many people in this space are from business, not from education. Could you tell us what were the key factors of success of Finland? Why you are super country in education, especially in school education? Was it government policy? Was it cultural issues? Was it crucial need for those changes?
Thank you, Soja. It's a very good question, because if you look at the Finnish education and what happened, let's say 1970s in our society, was not only that we developed the education, but same time we developed social security, kindergartens, women's possibility to working life. So many that kind of social things which actually give possibilities to school rise in the better place. The other thing was that before 1970s, we separated our students when they were 10 years old. Then there was an exam, and if you miss the exam, you somehow find yourself in strange vocational school. If you pass the exam, you find yourself in gymnasium. And when we ended that, we really strongly believe that, okay, every child is important in our small country. All 5 million people, we must think about it in Finland, that we must keep everybody in good school life, and everybody must be available and valuable for our society. Okay, I think that after Second World War we were lucky losers. We lived between Sweden and Russia, and if I compare Finland and let's say post-Soviet countries, I think that our path has been totally different one, because let's say we were independent country very strongly. And in Finland, I think that education has been always quite an important part of, let's say, our cultural heritage. Teachers has been, let's say, that kind of light towers of the small villages. They were not only the teachers, but they were people who organized cultural life, many other that kind of activities which civilized not only the students or pupils, but the whole community. And
so the prestige of teacher's profession is also one of key factors to have strong educational system.
Yes, and that's maybe the one part of this story of success, because in 1980s we quit inspections in Finnish education. We don't have any inspectors who coming to say to principals and teachers how to work, what you must do, and what is the right way. And same time we, how would I say, moved all the teacher training in the universities. And now what we are doing in Finland, we are also starting the new area of the kindergarten teacher, that all the kindergarten teachers also will be trained in the university. So we like to raise our capacity in the early childhood and continue the whole school life.
Okay, thank you, Ari.
You're welcome.
Илья, я думаю, что мой следующий вопрос тогда...
So, Ilja, my next question to you probably. Ari mentioned post-Soviet countries, and basically maybe your path is similar to Lithuania, Ukraine is similar, yes or no? I mean, you may disagree if you want. So one of your quotations that you could find in the media, you said, I quote, the graduates of Stanford University annually found about 1,000 companies which are invested, and about $2 billion are invested annually in these companies. So what Jack Ma said, knowledge to know, to use this knowledge to create something new. So what do you say? Why don't we have the same situation with Ukrainian universities and in higher education at all in post-Soviet countries? What's the main problem, would you say? Yeah, I would probably add a little bit to the statistics that Stanford University is not the biggest university on the planet. Annually, there are only 6,000 to 8,000 students annually. So it's comparable with the universities in post-Soviet countries.
Теперь, если померить, сколько сегодня компаний...
Now, if you see how many companies were created, those companies make $2.7 trillion per year. So 5.5 million of jobs is only a result of one Stanford University. So what I wanted to say with these illustrative numbers, in my observation, the post-Soviet countries, academy is too far away from businesses. Schools, universities, they exist in their own little bubble of reality or virtual reality. But they get these huge theoretical results, patents, books, articles, but they exist in their own reality and they never translate into economic product. If you look at the model of education in the US, we create professional knowledge. The knowledge that later produces economic product, that makes money, generates profit, pays taxes, pays for medical healthcare education also. So when you start measuring it in money, yeah, okay, so we there are so many graduates, this is the investment, but let's measure. Those graduates, their salary on the market after 3 years from graduation is going to be the same or much higher than those who didn't graduate this university. We don't even measure that. In the US, if a university, and by the way, the education is not free there, it's paid. So higher education on average costs about $250,000. And I'm not talking about Stanford or others, yeah? Not average. It's not Harvard or Stanford, it's average. And that's not subsidized by either state or parents. It's based on loans that are given to students. And so that the university has to convince, before you buy a car or a house, get a $250,000 loan. You have to convince them. Only by promising that you will earn $100,000 higher, more every year than if you don't graduate. It's pure math. Those are private universities. They're not subsidized by state budgets. So mostly it's private money. So the purpose of American universities is to produce economic products. So knowledge is translated into products. So we can analyze some segments. There may be some disparagement, but the main problem of post-Soviet and even European space is that all the academia, all the schools, high schools, they exist for academic results. We did audit of patents in Lithuania. We counted about 10 billion euro worth of patents. No tools, though, no economic tools, no regulatory tools there are to turn these knowledge into startups and projects. There's no infrastructure. So these patents are still collecting dust. In 10 years they will expire, and a huge European state money is allocated as subsidies to achieve these numbers and figures, but there's no economic project. There are lower pensions. That's the main problem. Should I resume? So the first factor is that academic and theoretical knowledge are too far away from real economy, real needs of the society, and they're not oriented at practical achievements of students. Yeah, I would rephrase it and would say there's no bridges. There are no bridges that allow to translate knowledge into economic reality. So to get a patent into a startup, there's no regulatory methodology how a startup can get a patent to use it. In Ukraine, it's the similar situation, right? Right. In Lithuania, there are laws where copyright for everything that a student writes or creates or comes up with. Just if it's a university premise that they wrote it, it belongs to university. A startup says, we invented a super product in 3,000 hours. We want a venture fund to invest it. And when you do an audit, we say to the student, look, you have no rights over your inventions. When you go to university, the university starts asking, what do we get from that? Using venture fund, you can buy this technology from the university. It's in best case. And the universities limit that possibility. Yeah, there's a theory that on a higher level, the rectors say, we are innovators, we're so good, but there's also practice, where they either sign or and allow the student to use information in the lab or not. So on the higher level, there's no politician or rector who would not be saying we're innovate, but in practice they don't innovate. Quick question, as an IT entrepreneur, as a venture capitalist, can you influence higher education in your country? Can you change the curriculum to add the skills or knowledge that your graduates need or are missing so that they are more effective? In theory, yes, we can. So it's a number of times, not in theory, do you have? I'm saying in theory because the weight and the influence from such people like me is minimal. We can do a class or a lecture, that's a drop in the sea. What I believe more is alternative non-formal education systems. So one of our investments is peer-to-peer education. The professionals who are working in the field, who have knowledge, who can monetize their knowledge through master classes. When people teach people, and formal education has no place there. We believe that the highest quality of knowledge they can be transferred like that only, from peer-to-peer. We don't need bureaucracy and bureaucratic spam to put those knowledge into paper. So I think peer-to-peer systems in education will fill the niches that the formal education cannot fill. Whereas to help the formal education, yeah, you can, but it's a very slow process. Thank you. Well, then I would like to switch to Olga. My question to you: you're a fresh product of educational system. You are a successful student. You are a successful graduate of a school. Can you share some live impression? What has guided you in an educational system? What helped you? And what would you missing in educational system? What would you like to add or change? Let me start from saying that by participating in international Olympic competitions in education, I had an opportunity to talk to students from all over the world. And now the most successful educational systems are in the US and Asia, China, Singapore. Those are two radically different concepts. In the US, they want to get a percentage of successful kids. So the whole system of education is aimed at finding those kids and building them, developing their skills and knowledge, because they are potential experts of higher class. In the Asian educational system, the concept is that every child is gifted, every child is talented, and our mission is to find them and help them develop their talents. So the truth is somewhere in between, and that is the concept that the new Ukrainian school as a foundation tries to use. But there are a lot of hindrances and barriers. First of all, there's a lack of changes in the teachers. The worst problem is that they still teach by coercing. The reform only touched the outlook of the facades of the buildings, how tables may look, we've set the new equipment, but the teachers are the same coercive teachers who stick to the plan and feed the redundant knowledge and then scratch the surface of that redundant knowledge during the exam to see if they memorize it or not. So the successful educational system gives you an opportunity to get skills. So you can try that and this and this and that. Teaching is no longer about imparting knowledge on someone. So to clarify, when you met your scientists in other countries, do you feel that you were missing some skills? So have you felt that as you were just learning in the school, that you were lacking skills, not knowledge? Yeah, I felt it. I felt it at the start of my career when I first traveled to international Olympic competition. So their educational process, they want language lessons are used to teach you to practice to sell your product or talk to on the street. On the scientific lessons, they study something that they selected. The priority is what they want to learn, and then they go deeper in that. But also, the teacher is not just a feeder of information. It's a person that inspires you, makes you curious about the subject, gives you an opportunity to learn more than the teacher knows. So your scientific achievements, have teachers helped you with them? Do you think it's their credit as well, that they stayed by you? Yeah. My scientific tutor was my biology teacher from my lyceum. Was a very successful teacher, and his students are very successful. And my scientific tutor or teacher is an example what a new Ukrainian teacher should be like. It's focused on giving you opportunity to attain skills, not just some knowledge or information about stuff, but giving you opportunity to try stuff. And he was trying to bring those two concepts together. He works with all students, but he selects the backbone of students who really want to make something new, who really want to achieve higher standards, and that's whom he spends most of their time to. So, and they really hit higher points, not only in their own field, but in between as well. But another big problem we have is there's no integration of this process in our academia. So to what Olga said, maybe that information is useful to the people present. In Canada and Finland, I don't know, in Lithuania, but the high school students, they study about 8 subjects that of their own choice. So that's what we're saying. Intervalization, letting students learn what they want. Ukrainian school kid, by standard, has to study 22 disciplines, 22 subjects, so to say. So there is no chance you have time to do what you want. You have to steal that time. Otherwise, the plan steals your time for these 22 subjects.
How many subjects students have to learn?
It depends. Canada and the US are quite different because every state and province has different jurisdictions. So
In your province?
so mine is they need 21 credits is what it's called. So one course, one credit. And there's seven key credits that they would need. And then the rest is by choice, depending on which pathway you're going to take.
Тобто 7 обов'язкових дисциплін і далі на вибір на 21 кредит можна набрати. Ari, what about Finland?
In Finnish high school, there's around 20 different subjects, but the kids are clever. They choose what they like to study, and then they left the other one a little bit more, how would I say, out of their daily work. Okay, the teachers don't like that because normally the teachers think about it that my philosophy, my history, my mathematics is the most important subjects in the school. But the kids actually, they think about it, their future, and they choose their own personal curriculum. And I think that's one of the key things in Finland, that children have the possibilities to make their own curriculum. I have the 1,200 students in my school, and each one is follow their own curriculum. Nobody has the same kind of timetable. So that's
Wow.
the possibility.
Amazing. Тобто, якщо ви зрозуміли, у школі Арі 200 старшокласників.
So 200 students, each one of them according to individual curriculum. Great. So to sum up what Olga said, the lack of individualization, lack of reform in content, in methodology of how teachers teach and how they build skills. About skills, I would like to give you opportunity to, I know the organizers have prepared a little survey to us. I would like to ask to bring it on the screen. Those who have chatbot or forum, you can enter the voting. Can you show this voting system? So you can vote for skills that you believe are the most important to develop in the modern educational system, so that the graduates can be effective, successful on the market, on the future market. Let me read. So first, complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, managing people, interaction with people, and emotional intellect. So please vote for these skills, and at the end of the panel we will see the results. What do you as an audience believe? So Ilja, I will continue with you probably. So the question from the audience. How, in your opinion, businesses can support education in Lithuania and in other countries? What do businesses have to do to help or develop an educational system, to innovate, to support it? I believe in the splitting the tasks. The business's mission is not to develop the educational system, but to use the fruits of education in order to create an economic product. We have to, each one of us have to do what we have to do. And businesses exist to generate profit to investors who also back the pension fund, who back your social welfare and everything. So that's the main task of business. The model cooperation between businesses and academia, there are many models. The most successful is the aforementioned Stanford University. And those models, they see that for businesses, the academies are ready to ship the resources, to give them. There's an investment fund at Stanford University who accumulates knowledge, patents, who can work with private capital, having resources that university has, the labs, facilities, know-how, with private money, in order to fund the startups, in order to create intellectual property, that the startups create jobs, economic product, etc. So let me stress again, I think businesses don't have to try and remake education. I think education and businesses have to build synergies, where each one is busy doing their own stuff and all together creating added value. About added value, mention that you also invest in educational startups like peer-to-peer education, online education, right? So your estimate, in 10 years, will the online education systems replace higher education, or even higher school education? Well, maybe you'll disagree with me, but I may assume that initially formal education changes its purpose. Instead of giving knowledge, the modern mission of formal education is to be a platform for those who want to get the knowledge to come and get it. So it's a platform, it's a playground where you can get access, co-working space, community, lab space, but I educate myself. And that model is much stronger than the passive students who come to school and they are taught everything that the plan says. So it's important for a modern person to know the goal, what they want to do, and to be able to use the platform, because knowledge itself is redundant. You have everywhere knowledge. You can learn everything. The knowledge is there. Grab it. You have to have motivation. You have to want it. You have to be curious. So this passive model of you come in there and I tell you what you study, that's out the window. So digital channels, YouTube, master classes, anything, they multiply effect of education, where the audience of a teacher, not 20 people, but 20 million. It's much stronger effect, and I believe in that. So I'm a firm believer in peer-to-peer education, because the most valuable, the most modern, the state-of-the-art knowledge, they don't precipitate into formal system. They're out there in the people. Well, Armand has to add to this, yes?
Both, actually. I don't disagree with Ilya. I think that peer-to-peer is extremely important. I think it's a niche. Like he said, you know, it's part of a global education of the child. I think we all agree you don't know what you don't know. And at the end of the day, if you don't know what you don't know, you need somebody to help you facilitate that. And I think higher learning is getting crapped on quite a lot for numerous reasons, and part of it's the $250,000 it costs you in the US. Now, I would highly suggest that the US model is not something Ukraine copies, because it is broken, right? And there's a reason for that. It's based off standardized testing. It's based off economic policy that is segregating by nature. Right? It's about the 1% getting more and more, and the middle class now being erupted, right? So you got to watch out where you're going to copy paste. And Stanford is an excellent example of design thinking. They have a D school with David Kelly, which is all about design thinking, which is actually the birth of IDEO, which is one of the biggest think tanks in the world in terms of creating. I think education can do a big part of that. So I think as a teacher, the first thing that you do is you approach it from a design thinking mindset. How do I reach my students? How do I help my students learn? That then brings the culture. That brings now the projects that you can bring into place to help build resiliency for entrepreneurship. Give you an example. Olga's a very good example. We have one at SAME at our school where he went through modern history, very interested in medicine. Well, how am I going to connect modern history to him? Let's look at how medicine developed through the wars. Was it ethical or not? Why is it ethical or not? Then look at presenting that, communicating that to your peers. Now he went into physics, looked at 3D printing and how it could help medicine. Now he's actually studying in medicine and looking at 3D printing to focus radiation on tumors during that process. So he's doing top-of-the-line technology. He's doing a liberal arts background because it's important to think about ethics as we're moving forward. And it's something that I need to, push back on a bit, is that when you don't know what you don't know, we all come from a foundational knowledge of some parts. We have that, but we also have skills, competencies that were developed. We have social emotional resiliency that's developed. Now with this digital age, we need to think about, okay, well, how do we approach that in this fast-moving world? But more importantly, how do we give them the tools to be able to continue to be lifelong learners, like Ilja says? And it's not as easy as just saying, hey, we can go and just find out. Well, yeah, you can if you're intrinsically motivated, fine. But we know that intrinsic motivation is not everyone. We also know that a strong public education system where you're really giving the opportunity to everybody also means the network that the haves have and the have-nots don't, right? So you need to create that opportunity for them to come up from there. So to me, there's a catch-22 there, and you got to really watch out in terms of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, which is a common analogy in Canada. We need to watch out. So is in Ukraine. Right? Because if that's the case, then you're going to have issues. Take medicine. This narrow-minded focus on what does industry need? Well, you're not looking at a flourishing life in all capacities. So medicine did that in the 80s and 90s. We want the best, the brightest, and only that. You know what they found out? They found out that they couldn't communicate bedside manners. They couldn't communicate to patients, and that had effects on patient care. So now they're looking at liberal arts degrees as well in terms of bringing them into medical school, right? So I think you can't pigeon education into one number. It's not 7%, or it's so broad, and it brings in the whole community. And to answer one of the questions that you guys talked about in terms of what can business do, business plays a key part in education. So does parents, so do sports, so does music, so does nonprofits, so does everybody that plays, from the bus driver to the custodian. They all play a part in education, right? We all have a role in it, whether we like it or not. But right now, the purpose, and if I go back to your question about $300 for a teacher, I'm guessing that's not middle class in Ukraine. I'm guessing that's pretty low on the totem pole. So to answer, yeah, you do need to pay them, because you need to bring them up to a certain level. That status of teaching, you're bringing the best and the brightest to help facilitate, like Ilja says, to looking at these different complexities that you have now, right? If you're going to be a facilitator, you need to have people that are going to think on their feet.
And if I'll summarize what you said about online education, I assume what you also said, it's only good to give us knowledge, but it's not enough to give us skills on communicating. But I think we now need to switch to Ari, because you mentioned a very important stakeholder, parents. Батьки. І насправді я знаю вже з досвіду.
I know from my experience that no educational system can be changed without teachers and without parents. If parents don't know what the new economic school gives you better, what is the mission, how to support kids, so it's hard to move the whole industry.
Parents in Finland, did they also help to move forward education in Finland? Were they supportive enough? And as a school leader, what is your role and main task in cooperation with parents of your students? You can give advice. They're not only entrepreneurs, they are parents also.
Yeah.
What would be the best role for the parents?
Yeah, that was my first question, that how many parents we have here in our room.
Скільки батьків?
Please raise hand. I just take a look that I can escape after my answer. So, I always say first for my parents when they're coming in the first parents' evening in my school that please don't believe all the stories what your child told about the school. And I promise that I don't believe all the stories what your child tell your family life. So I think that one of the key issue with the parents is the communication. And I'm a little bit worried about that still even in Finland our communication between parents and the school is somehow the way that the principal sent the message for the mother or father and said that, okay, your son or daughter is not behaved good in the school. So school actually sent quite a lot negative message. And what I have tried to do in my school, I try to send one positive message every week or every month. All of the parents, that my great honor is work so clever and intelligent young people. So actually I think that the parents also in this case when we talk about the business and entrepreneurship and working life, we use them quite a lot about that. They're coming and telling what they are doing, where they are working, what has been their working life path, and many, many other things which somehow coming much more closer than we ordered somebody from some enterprises to speaking about the same subject. They are mothers, fathers, and they are really proud when they have the possibilities come back to school because somehow many of the, especially men, who have now working in the private sector, they not have been such a good in the school. And so coming back in the school is somehow that kind also that, okay, I'm important and I have the role here in the school life.
Thank you. I would say in Ukraine we also have very similar problems. Оля, моє наступне питання буде...
Well, my next question is to you. My next question is to you, but maybe it's not about education per se. We have Ilja from the business. We have a lot of entrepreneurs in this audience. I know that they are all crying. The millennials make them cry when they come to work to get hired. It's a completely different type of people. They work differently. They have different likes and dislikes. So your question, you're not even a millennial. You are Generation Z, so-called Generation Z. What's your vision of an ideal employer, an ideal company where you would agree to work? Well, first of all, a Generation Z is already on the hunt list by world companies. People who are now 18 and just a month ago, now they work in Google Corporation. Those are graduates from small Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. Ideal employer for Generation Z, it would be a discipline that doesn't stand in the way of your comfort. Secondly, it's career growth, career opportunities, where employer gives you not only routine tasks, something you would rather not do, something boring, but they give you opportunity to do where you shine, to have a say in things, have impact, to make a real difference. So Generation Z, maybe those are, we can call them children that are already changing the world, and we have to give them this opportunity. It's very important. It changes the country. So this opportunity should not appear in 5 or 8 years of your career, but faster, yeah. Because the small Academy of Sciences, almost every month they send a delegation to international competitions. And that demonstrates the reforms that are happening in Ukraine. It demonstrates the product. It's not only presenting your scientific projects, but it's also a signal to potential investors who come and see that in Ukraine it's a great field for investments, to come and work with our graduates, with our talented youth, and not only for the sake of cooperation, but for the sake of resolving another big problem, that a lot of graduates, they go abroad. There's a question from the audience. What field have you selected for your further education? I study in the National Medical Academy. I plan to get a master's degree abroad and then to go back to Ukraine to work here. That's the concept. Most graduates of the small in my 11th grade, the sound was restored. So as I was in my 11th grade, when the reform had just started, and I graduated from Scientific Lyceum. There were a lot of ambitious students who do scientific work, volunteer activity, or startups. And we have graduated to a university that is still very Soviet. Yeah, Olya studies here not because she had no proposals from abroad. I know that successful graduates are really hunted after by Stanford, by MIT, by Israelis, and there are a lot of good offers for Ukrainian youth. So that's a conscious choice of you. We thank you for that.
It comes from the audience, and question is about some creative disciplines that you would probably recommend to give to add to school curriculum. Які креативні навчальні дисципліни ви б додали в шкільний план? Саме про шкільний план.
So, school curriculum. But if you have a recommendation for universities, you can add that. Disciplines or entrepreneurship. I'm going to risk to assume that such disciplines as coding and processing data can also be creative. But having said that, I'm going to say it's not profession, it's basic literacy. Like 200 years ago, reading and writing was a profession. Nobody would assume that today everybody would read. But tomorrow, those who will not be able to code, create code, write code, and work with data. Because any artificial intelligence is nothing without data, without data sets. So all these disciplines I would flag as a must. Armand?
You would add to school or university curriculum as a creative subject or interesting subject which is missing at the moment?
I think it's really a balanced approach to it, and creativity to me can be done in everything. Oftentimes people think they're not creative, but depending on one aspect of their lives, they might be. You take me into the classroom, I'm extremely creative in the classroom to try to connect with students. Take me in terms of an artist, and I am drawing pencil figures, right? Like, it's not very beautiful by any stretch. So I think creativity can be had in all walks of life, but you need to understand what's the scaffolding to creativity. So the fact that you need to put paradigms and or not paradigms, sorry, guidelines, and how do you create those guidelines, and why do you create it, and how do you create the complexity, and so to me, creativity is part of the overall types of teaching. It's one of the competencies. But if you're looking at certain things, music is hugely important when you're young. Play is hugely important when you're young. We now regulate play all the time. So parents are now involved, and coaches are now involved, and we now jump in. Well, take for example, when we were all kids, and you would go out and play. You'd make up rules. And if there's one person that would completely dominate that game, those rules would change, right? Because you try to make it fair, but it's part of growing up. It's part of that process. So Pasi talks a lot about play-based learning. I think that's important for creativity. Music's obviously hugely important. The arts, and oftentimes when you cut in those. I would also add to that physical and mental health as part of creativity, right? We all know the more active you are, the better shape you are, the more oxygen goes to the brain, the more ideas that come up. But then those are all things that you can tie in. And then proper brainstorming techniques. How many times do ideas get shot down because you take the loudest idea instead of multiple ideas that come in? I disagree with Ilja a bit in terms of coding as being necessarily the future of literacy. I think the machines are going to be to the point where they're going to code themselves, and you need to know what to do with the machine. But I agree with them right now, it definitely is a literacy at this point. Yeah.
Thank you. Друзі, я також серед запитань, які ви надсилаєте, бачу прохання покращити.
Among the questions that we hear the urge to correct the sound. Ari and Olga.
That you would add. Maybe it's a strange question to educational super countries, but still, there's always some space for improvement.
Yes, we have just launched a new high school curriculum actually yesterday. And one of the key elements there will be the media literacy, so that the youngsters understand what media actually is. As we know, we have the presidents who sent the fake news more than we can actually read. So in this kind of world where information is, let's say, lightly reliable, it's a very important thing what you must understand. But maybe more I think about it, that what will be the school in the future if you look at the curriculum. So I like to see more integration between subjects. So not anymore that kind of classroom teaching, one teacher, 30 child, but more about the group of the teacher, group of the child, because as you know, the teachers are not only teaching the subject, but they are also teaching the way of the working life and life generally. And I think that all our next jobs or working life or whatever, social interaction between people will be one of the key things what we must somehow learn in the school. And I think it's not written like some words in the curriculum, but it must be that kind of basic value of all the work in the modern school.
Thank you. Оля, щось додасте про предмети, які...
Olga, will you add something about the subjects in schools? Well, too many subjects, that's the problem. They're too redundant. My main proposals is to change the language lessons, because we only do theory. Let's do more practice. Presenting yourself, your project, what you do to other people. That will help to really get the skill of using the language. How to use the language in a stressful situation. And a big problem among adults, when we're in a stressful situation, like public speaking, we lose the train of thought because the school doesn't train you that. mandatory subjects such as science or math, they should be really taught as a choice. I mean, deeper science, deeper math. You have to let the students feel their way among subjects, among disciplines, from what they like, that they navigate to what their talent is. And allowing people to leave the classroom, don't sit there just sitting for the sake of sitting there. Number of subjects, not to be increased, but decreased, mandatory subjects. To add hard skills, like coding, big data analysis. But if we talk about what subjects develop your creativity and your creative skills, the main response is not subjects, it's what you do during the lesson. If it's practice-oriented, if it's group work-oriented, then in any discipline you can develop these skills that we're talking about. I've heard.
Yesterday when I traveled here to KIEF, I was written a new chapter of my book, and I was thinking about the school curriculum, and I was just wondering that are we actually the right generation to make a new curriculum, because our mindset is the literacy, it's a numeracy, it's very that kind of old-fashioned. We read the literature and we learned our, how would I say, way of thinking through that. And now when I follow the youngsters, I'm just waiting the first one who will born right with his mobile phone in his or her hand. Meaning that maybe the new curriculum in the future must be more look like our young generation, not look like me, what is actually almost the past generation. So I think we must somehow find new kind of mindset and get out of that kind of life, what is quite a strange for our youngsters, because they are not anymore readers, perhaps they are not anymore writers, but if you give them the picture, they make the whole world for that.
Thank you. And я думаю, що зараз я хочу задати питання.
I would like to ask a question to Armand now, as an expert in innovation, in digitalization. In the modern world, if our children cannot, or we cannot use gadgets, we are less effective. Gadgets make us more effective, but there is also a flip side to any technology, and digitalization also sometimes leads to sociopathy, to a decreased capability to focus. Just recently I heard some statistics that the current kid in the 3rd or 4th grade on average only has an attention span of 8 seconds, like goldfish. Well, that's the trend that gadgets bring forth.
Side of technology, but there is other side, backside, like mental health, sociopathy, lack of concentration. As an educator, as a digital expert, what would you recommend to parents and to schools and universities? How to teach our kids to be responsible users of technology, and how to avoid these backsides? Maybe some limits on screen time, whatever.
I'm going to cut you off just 2 seconds. Digital expert or innovation expert, I think Ilja is the digital and innovation expert. I'm going to put it in an educational context, if that's all right. It's not easy, right? Because we are moving at this fast pace. There's disruption across the board. We're trying to catch up. And then we have our world leaders saying, don't worry, if I quote Jack Ma today, right? But in the same time, we know that Facebook influenced our elections in Canada grossly. And they're doing the same in the US. So there is something to be learned about all this, right? And at the end of the day, I think there's two parts. One is the part of the child and his education moving forward. And I agree with Ari and Olga in terms of more collaborative teaching, more collaborative courses. That's definitely a norm. And I know Finland's moving that way, and I know well in Canada. But it starts from a young age. So at home, I'm going to talk as a parent. At home, we have completely banned any tablets or cell phones the moment we walk in. So the moment we walk in, there's nothing. It's about interaction with the child. So if my 9-month-old sees me on my tablet and only on my tablet, and that's what he sees the tablet as more important than him, right? So as a parent, I'm failing my child in that situation. And it's hard, right? I am addicted to my phone, realistically, right? I'm constantly on it. And I think I'll be honest with you, I think the elderly, the third generation, I think is even worse because they didn't necessarily grow up with it. I go home and sometimes, I got to tell my mom, hey, get off the tablet and interact with your kids. And she's a university prof, right? So there's definitely is that path of digital literacy that really needs to happen in terms of, okay, how do we put that aside? What about mindfulness? When do we shut it off? Should it be shut off, and should it even enter your bedroom, right? Those are questions that need to be asked that we don't often ask when we're creating, but now we need to deal with it. And I can tell you right off the bat, mental health is an issue all over the world for the kids. It's a massive issue. And it's not just an issue of being addicted to TikTok, it's also an issue of social bullying. It's also an issue of trying to navigate what you're seeing, right? And that's where it comes from a foundation. That's why I say don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, is that you still need to have a foundation to be able to analyze what's coming to you and know what's true and what's not, right? Then on the second side of that is I think tech and I think business has an ethical, moral compass that they need to respect, and they need to make sure that it's taken care of because it is our future generation that are getting impacted. I'm talking about data mining. I'm talking about ethics. I'm talking about making sure that we're using these tools properly, and if they're not, then they shouldn't be there, right? It's like anything else.
So, if we get back to practice, in your school, if you had to make the decision, you wouldn't ban mobile phones, for example. You would change curriculum and atmosphere at school to offer them something better and more interesting than their phones. Am I right?
Yeah, so there's certain subjects that you need to teach sort of hands-on, and digital literacy is definitely one of those. So how do you use it as a collaborative tool? How can you make your life easier? How do you brainstorm when you're in 5 different countries to make sure that all the voices are heard? How do you use that tool for good? How do you communicate using that tool? What's the proper? So, but I think there's also a cognitive development part. And if you're looking from kindergarten to grade 12, kindergarten should not have a cell phone in their hands. Absolutely not. That's my own version of it, but I'm pretty sure that should not happen. I think Steve Jobs is quoted on this, that he didn't give one till he was 5 years old. But as you progress, that's the tool that is used. But it's not just the tool, because the tool is going to change, and the software is going to change, and the platforms are going to change. It's how to learn and how to be able to use those tools in the proper manner.
Okay, thank you. And, знаєте, ми сьогодні багато говоримо про шкільну, про неформальну, про
We talk about higher education, informal education. There's an interesting question to Arya and Armand about preschool primary education. So I'm going to read this question.
kids are learning sponges. Would you include in early school humanities subjects such as diversity, inclusiveness, or ecology guidelines, or even gender equality? Would you add such as subjects?
Early childhood and primary. Yeah. Now in Finland, the early childhood education is compulsory 2 years, so it's very closely connected now to primary school earlier it was more like the kindergarten. Now it's a, let's say, that kind of middle between the kindergarten and primary. And yes, we actually have launched in our curriculums also in kindergarten transversal competencies, which are 6 or 7 there, and part of them we have this kind of discussion about gender equality, and of course we have also in Finland we have the more and more people coming out of the Europe and start to live in our country. So also this kind of questions about the, let's say, what the new Finland looks like when we have the more immigration. So it's very important when we discuss, for example, diversity. So, like Armand said, I think that the values behind all the things what we do in education must be very, how would I say, close to daily normal work, and those things what you mentioned, they are really high values of each society.
I'll add to Ari in terms of 2 things. He talked about parents, and I'm a parent as well, and we feel guilty often as parents. I work long hours, so does my wife, and my wife's a finance expert. And oftentimes, when you feel guilty, you want to connect with your child as best as you can. And what's happened in numerous places is that you believe everything they say, and you give them everything that they need, but the truth is they're a child and they're developing. Children lie, right? They try to get away with it. My 5-year-old lied to me a couple of days ago, and I could tell it was a lie, right? So what Ari talked about in terms of communication and trust between teacher and parent, it's key, because the parent is the first teacher of the child. You know the child best. So if we can open up those lines of communication, that helps. And when it comes to values, your values of a community change depending on where you are. So if I look at AI, there was a professor at MIT that we're looking at how do you program AI for autonomous cars? And he was looking at different communities and how the decisions of the autonomous car would be different depending on which community. So that's the same for values, right? The values are different in each community. And to just put it in the curriculum would be an issue. We need to make sure that everybody takes responsibility of that. And we're talking about equity, we're talking about rights. I'm going to give you something, modeling. So in terms of modeling, if you look at our politicians worldwide, we're talking about collaboration, we're talking about critical thinking, we're talking about problem solving to address world problems. Our politics are more polarized than ever. Not only that, the politicians are using that polarization to get elected and to create divide between society. How are we supposed to be, as the classroom teacher, supposed to say, you know what, don't bully. You know what, you need to collaborate. When they see their role models on TV, when they see the people interacting in daily life, and that those aren't the values that they're projecting, right? So it really is the community as a whole that needs to think about how they're going to educate. So not just early childhood, but everybody.
And there is an answer from the audience again. До речі, друзі, дякуємо за ваші запитання.
Thanks a lot for your questions. Please send your questions more.
Because I have to deal with it quite often. And for me, this question represents demand for some positive changes, but at the same time, fear for these changes. Питання, яке прийшло з залу, я хочу його задати.
So the question that comes from the audience, it's about individualization. And that's the question. Don't you see a threat in an individualized education? And then there will be no foundation for most people in terms of discipline. It's an easy question for Western world, but in Ukraine we've been hearing this question a lot. And I would be thankful if you answer that. So don't you see a threat that education moves towards more individualized? Other than instead of 22 school mandatory subjects, they want to focus on less, but with better quality. Would you think that the literacy, general literacy, will drop down? You know, English Webster Dictionary 200 years ago included six names for different professions, like potter, baker. Now we know more than 10,000. I think the world is moving toward a situation where 7 billion people, 7 billion skill sets, 7 billion professions. I don't see a threat here. Even more, I think that's the future. Only when you are able to mix and match something and be unique, there are no two equally similar individuals with the same competence, then the creative potential will be unleashed. Yeah, it's a question that worries a lot of parents, not school kids.
Armand, Ari, Olga. Olga, if you don't mind, ladies first. Ola.
Школа має орієнтуватися на те, щоб випустити.
The school has to help a person become expert, but to study, to learn 22 subjects for an A, it's impossible. I'm telling you. In our schools, that's so much dry knowledge. About my school subjects, I studied them, but I have a clear understanding who am I going to be in the future. And that's the main question for everybody who thinks about individualization. Would you like to be a patient of a doctor who knows 22 subjects, or you want to be a patient of a doctor who knows how to treat you, not to know the subjects?
Just got a question quick. Who here would consider themselves a relatively having a successful life or successful business person? Just raise your hand. I'm hoping there's a lot going up because otherwise you're... Okay, so there's a few. And my guess is everybody in this room went through education at some point. So there is some foundational, and we talked about that foundational knowledge, and I'm all for, I'm very much all for trying to look forward and innovate, but there are some foundational knowledge that is key. And I have a background in sales and marketing. I worked for a Forbes 500 company for 7 years, and our Forbes 500 company had purpose and values were part of our DNA. But I was a salesman, and the first mistake that I made as a salesman is I thought the sales pitch was more important than connecting with my customer and finding that win-win. And it's the same in teaching, right? You can do it with still foundational knowledge and personalize it with other courses that they can take. And that's what we're doing in Canada and what they're doing in Finland and Singapore and other areas. It's that there still is some foundation, but then after that, it's connecting it to try to find what they are passionate about. So I have a student that was passionate about women's rights. She had a brilliant mind, absolutely brilliant mind. And so we looked at computational thinking and computer science within my class, which I teach, which is modern history. So connected her to that, connected with other teachers. We've created a broader project for her to be passionate about that we all evaluated within our fields, within our subjects, for what we needed in terms of curriculum content that we were trying to help her with. But then at the same point, developing her competencies and skills in other areas for her expertise. She's now at university. She now has funding. University of New Brunswick has different funding models for incubators, same as MIT and in Harvard, actually. And the University of New Brunswick is actually helping support her, and she's looking at drones and how drones can help sustainable agriculture in developing countries. So she's now taken her passion for rights, and now looking at helping others by technology. So to me, it's about having teachers that are professionals that can think outside the box, and how do we personalize that to kids?
Thank you, and great story of success. Друзі, наша панель добігає кінця, і...
Our panel is close to a wrap, and as a wrapping question, I would like to ask the following.
answer that personalizing?
Okay,
Shortly.
some improvisation, but I'll do it.
Yeah, shortly. When I look me myself as a young boy, I hate to be in school. I really hate to be, and the reason was that the school forced me to behave like the other one, and they have a lot of rules. And I think when I started as a principal, I decided that in my schools there will be no rules which are not only for the students, but if we make the new rules, it's also the rule for the teachers and the students. And you can believe that we don't have many rules because the adults don't want to have them. Teachers don't want to have rules. So why we actually force the students to live that kind of general life where rules and school tell what is right and wrong. So all in all, we personalized Finnish education very strongly. During this last 5 years, we have personalized step by step from early childhood to high schools, and then we continue to universities. I love to see that possibilities that our kids can actually choose something of their own, because I think our teachers can handle that also.
That's very important. And moving on to the last question of our session today. It's short, please be short, and it's inspiring, I think. It came from the audience, and they ask one recommendation for Ukrainian educators, teachers, university lecturers, and professors. What would you recommend them to do so that very fast Ukraine could also become educational super country? Порада українським вчителям, викладачам, що робити сьогодні, щоб справді завтра...
And she reiterates the question, what would you recommend for the Ukrainian educational sphere? Would you like to start? Yeah. I will answer as an investor, but I think that's applicable to teachers. I'm a firm believer that everything stems from motivation. You know, the only parameter when we assess a company is motivation. If people are motivated, if they want to do something, then you will find everything. If you're motivated, if you really want something, you will do it. If you don't want, regardless of what resources you throw at you, it will be a wasted effort. Motivation is a skill. You can acquire it. So I would start working with motivation.
Your inspiring recommendation?
I agree with Ari in terms of rules. My only rule in my classroom is respect. Respect yourself, respect others, whatever, but it all goes under respect, and that includes me. So I actually don't have, you know, hall passes to go to the bathroom. You need to go to the bathroom, you don't have to ask. I trust you to go. If you abuse it, then there's a different question. Maybe you have diabetes, maybe I have to talk to your parents about something, there might be a health issue. But the reality is respect, and my key takeaway is do what's best for kids. It doesn't matter what policy, it doesn't matter what's going on, is you do what's best for kids. At the end of the day, that's your job as a teacher, is to do what's best for kids. So if it's personalizing it, that's what's best for kids. If it's trying to help them with resiliency, then that's what's best. Sometimes it's giving them a kick in the butt, not literally, or figuratively. It's, you know what, that's what they need. They need a bit of motivation, like Ilja says.
Thank you. Ari?
Okay, my first recommendation is that read my book, Vishni Class, about the Finnish education. Here all the secrets and mistakes of the Finnish education. But let's say it that way, that I have visited several Ukrainian schools and see very many teachers, great teachers. But please, put the child in the middle of your work and be not so, how could I say, interested about their presentation, but be much more interested about their learnings. That's my advice and my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. І Ольга, ваша рекомендація, якщо така є?
Ну,
First of all, for a teacher is to accept the role of a mentor who sets an example and inspires the students to explore what they want, what they're good at, not just here's your knowledge, learn it, pass an exam. So in 10 years, your students will build your country. So it's now in your hands. You're building their consciousness. So my advice is set your own example. An example is a guiding light. And find people who can set an example so that your students have real inspiration. And when they were really inspired, the efficiency of their work was going to be so much higher. Thank you, Olga, and thank you for your active participation. Thank you for the panelists. Give a round of applause. And before we leave, look at the results of your voting. Critical thinking leads and complex problem solving. So critical thinking wins this voting, but I would tell you that the survey in Davos Economic Forum matches almost these results. And the skills that the future experts, scientists put in the first place is complex problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. So creativity is not in the trend in this survey. It only attained 9%. Davos Economic Forum, it attained top 3 leading. So thanks a lot. Have a good day.